Hello everyone and welcome to Total Quilter Monthly. My name is Mark Garetz and I'm a national Floriani educator, and this month we're going to be having some fun with repeats. So the repeat function built into Total Quilter and My Decorative Quilter is something that I'm going to guess that you've probably never used. We would use it in Total Control to do things like, take a label or a badge or something and repeat it multiple times so we could stitch it out all on one hooping. But there's lots of other things you can do with it. So normally you would take a design, like let's take one of these built-in decor designs here, like let's just choose this one. And let's double click our magnifying glass to bring it up big. And you will recall from all of our prior lessons that double clicking the magnifying glass is a shortcut for zoom to fit. And I'll click off it so we can see the colors, and I'll even turn it on to 3D here so you can see what it looks like. Now this is way blown up, so I'm going to zoom out so you get a better idea of what that design looks like. Let me do that a couple times. There we go. So that's kind of just a little decor design you might use as a flourish in a quilt somewhere. You might use it multiple times around the corners and things. But I'll show you what you might do with this when it comes to using the design repeat function. So if I select it, my design repeat icon is located right here. So if I click it, it's going to default to repeating that design in a row of 2 and another row of 2. So 2 rows down and 2 rows across. And our row settings are set right here. So if I wanted it to only be one line, I would change this to 1 and I would get 1. And if I change this back to 2, I get 2, etc. Now I can have some fun with this one because down here I've got the ability to flip every other design horizontally or flip every other one vertically. I can offset them, and I can also change the horizontal and vertical distance between them. But let's just see what flip looks like. I'm going to check both of these to flip both of them, and now you can see I've got kind of a nice layout here. So I might use this somewhere on a quilt, or maybe I wouldn't use anything like this in my quilt design. But this is what you would do kind of with this tool normally, but we're going to today take this to the next level and show you some of the real creative things that you can do with the design repeat tool. So I'm going to cancel that, and I'm actually going to delete that design, and I'm going to do that by pressing delete on my keyboard. And instead what I'm going to bring in is a piece of artwork design. So these are not stitches yet. We can turn them into stitches when we're done creating our shapes. But to do that, I'm going to go to this custom shape menu, and I've got a lot of shapes I can play with. But I'm going to choose one that you might not think would be very interesting as a design repeat. I'm going to choose this arrow 01, and it's going to bring it in, and when it brings that in, it's filled. So I want to turn this into more of a line type design, so I'm going to turn the fill off. So I'm going to come over here to my properties box and uncheck fill and click apply. And it's brought it in at full size here. Sometimes, depending on your system and where the last thing you were looking at, it won't bring it in this big. But this is the arrow, and it's just a line right now. It's not stitches. We would turn it into either a running stitch or into an applique or a steel stitch or a motif stitch by using these one clicks down here. So you could do that after we are done manipulating it with the repeat tool, or you could do it before, but we're just going to leave this as artwork for now. And with it selected, I'm going to click my repeat tool, and you'll see that I get 2 by 2 and they're butted up to each other. But what I'm going to do instead is get rid of this second row, and I'm going to do that by changing my number down to just to 1. So now I only have 1 row and I have 2 across. But what I'm also going to do is flip every other one horizontally. So I'm going to click that, and that brings the arrows pointing. Now, if I flipped every other one vertically, it wouldn't matter because vertically these are symmetrical, so you wouldn't see any difference. So we're not going to bother to do that with this design. But you might think this is kind of interesting to stitch out this way. I don't think it's all that interesting, but let's make it more interesting. Now, normally when you change the horizontal distance of these, you're spreading them apart. So if we go positive with this, and I'm just going to hold down the mouse on that button here, on the up button, to spread them apart. So usually you would do this to get some spacing between the objects on the row. But you're not limited to a positive distance. You can also go to a negative distance, and that's what's going to give us all the interesting effects with this tool. So if I go down to minus, as I start to get minus effects, you can start to see we're getting lots of different variations in the shape here. And if I go to about 3.64 or so like that, I get that kind of an interesting design. So if I get to something that I like and I say OK, I can bring that in, and now I've got a much more interesting design to stitch out as an element somewhere. So that's just a basic idea where we're headed with this, and you can remember that the original shape was an arrow, but when you look at this it doesn't look much like an arrow anymore because we've overlapped the shapes. Alright, so let's select that one, and I'm going to delete it because we're going to move on to do some other more interesting things. So I'm going to go back to my custom shapes one more time, and this time I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to bring in this diamond right here. Again, I'm going to turn off the fill and click apply, and this time I'm going to go to my horizontal or my repeat design tool, and I am going to leave it as 2 by 2. But what I'm going to do instead of just leaving it like this is I'm going to change my horizontal distance to negative again. So I'm going to come in here and go minus on it till I see something kind of pleasing that I like, and I kind of like that. Now let's also do a minus on the vertical distance. So if I come down like this, what I'm watching is right in here. I'm watching this diamond and this diamond, and if I could have them unsymmetrical if I want, if I like that effect, but I want to try and kind of make them the same size. So I'm just going to visually adjust this downwards till I get them about the same size. So there we go. So that's kind of an interesting little pattern. So I'm going to click OK and bring that into my design window. So if I like this just the way it is, I could stitch this out. I'd have to change it into stitches. But what if I take this design and I put it through design repeat one more time? So instead of just repeating that one diamond that we did to create this, I'm going to repeat this again. So if I just click design repeat, that brings that in, and look at what that looks like. Boy, I really like that one. I don't think I need to do anything to that. I'm just going to click OK, and now I've got a much more interesting pattern, and this might become the basis for something that I would stitch in the middle of a quilt block. I might even make an entire quilt block out of it by tracing over the top with either my normal mode or in Total Quilter my appliquilt. So this is some of the fun you can have with the repeat tool. So again, this design might go in the center of a block, but let's select that design and delete it. And again, I'm going to press the delete key on my keyboard. And let's see what else we can do with this. So let's go back to our custom shapes, and let's pick one that you wouldn't also necessarily think might be interesting. Let's pick the cookie jar. Okay, and again, it this time made it small because we had a much bigger design on the screen before. I'm going to once again turn off the fill by unchecking it and clicking apply, and let's run it through our repeat tool. So now I've got a pretty typical repeat of the cookie jar, but this time let's play with it some more. So let's flip every other one horizontally, which didn't do anything, but let's flip every other one vertically. I'm going to uncheck that, so that looks pretty nice. But again, let's play with our horizontal and vertical distance to a negative. So let's kind of slide this one over, maybe there, and let's slide this one up. And it looks like it's making the design bigger, but it's actually not. It's only just fitting it to the screen, and since we're kind of squishing it in multiple directions, it's just enlarging over here. Now, I'm not sure I like the way this looks. Let's try flipping every other one horizontally, and let's see if that makes a difference. No. Let's change our number of repeats. Let's do more across. There we go. Now we're getting something more interesting. And we can keep playing with this, but if I click OK, bring that in, that gives you that design. Now you can, if you look close, you can tell there's cookie jar there, but in here we've got kind of a more interesting pattern. So this might be an interesting stipple pattern if you had cookies in your quilt design or something, but it's also just kind of an interesting pattern. So let me get rid of this. I'm going to select it, and we will hit delete on our keyboard one more time. Let me just show you one other really cool thing that you can do with this. Instead of choosing a custom shape this time, I'm going to come over here to my built-in shapes. These are where I get my rectangles, my circles, triangles, etc. So I'm going to click the ellipse, and I'm going to draw a circle here. And to get a perfect circle as I draw, I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard. So you can't see me holding down Control, but I'm going to hold down Control, and then I'm going to click and drag with my mouse to get the circle whatever size I want. I'm going to let off my mouse first, and then let off my keyboard key, my Control key, to keep it a perfect circle. So now I've got a circle. Let's go back to our repeat tool, and let's change our number down to 1. So I've just got one row. And now let's change our horizontal distance to negative, to where we get some overlapping effects like that. So that's kind of interesting. But now let's see what happens if I change my number across to way more than 2. Let's make a whole row of them, and then let's continue to change our horizontal distance down till we get something that looks like that. So that's kind of a neat spirograph effect, and I might use this on a border, in which case I might be more concerned about the output size here, so I can always see my size here. So this is pretty big for a border, but since this is artwork, I could resize it once it gets in. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll say OK, and if my border was a certain width, let's say my border piece was 8 inches, I could come here to my transform, and I would want to click maintain aspect ratio if I want to make sure I keep these circles as circles. And I could come down here and change this to 8 and click apply, and now I've got an 8 by 2.36 inch border piece. If I double click my magnifying glass to bring that back up on the screen, still looks the same, but now it's a size that might fit on my quilt border easier. And if I want to squish it, change it, I can do that by selecting it, and I can, squish it like this to get a different look. But I could also do that on the front end. So let me delete that, and I'm going to get a circle again. But this time I'm going to, instead of drawing a perfect circle, I'm going to purposefully draw an ellipse like this. And then I'm going to run that through the design repeat tool. Again, I'll go back down to one row down, and I'll change my number across to a lot. And then again, I'm going to minus my horizontal distance to get that kind of effect. So I can keep going on and on. So I can click apply and click OK. I don't necessarily need to click apply, but then I could run this through that tool again, and I could Now change the number across to 1, and now I can change my vertical distance down to get all kinds of interesting effects like that. Click OK, and now I've got a more interesting design that I might want to stitch out. So I can get all these kind of cool spirograph designs. Just a hint, try stitching these out with our variegated thread. They look really neat in variegated thread, but you can do all kinds of interesting things like this. So that is the basics of the design repeat tool. One of the questions I get a lot, though, and I'm going to select and delete this. One of the questions I get a lot is there a scallop repeat function in Total Quilter? And there is not. But we can create a scallop if we want to using the design repeat tool. So we'll do that using an ellipse. So I'm going to select an ellipse, and I'm just going to draw a circle, and I'll actually purposefully make it an ellipse like this. And then what I'm going to do is run it through my design repeat tool. Again, I'm going to change my number down to 1. I'm going to change my number across. Let's do 6. And again, I'm going to change now my horizontal distance, and I'm going to make it negative. And what I'm going to watch is I'm going to ignore the bottom part here. I'm just going to watch this top part here, because this is going to become our scallop. All right, so I'm just going to watch that till I get a scallop that I like. All right, so I kind of like that one. So let's just go ahead and do that, and we'll click OK. So now if I were to turn this into stitches, I would, just be going round and round and round, kind of like a spirograph. But I just want to stitch this top part here. Now, I could trace it, but there's an easier way to do it. And that's using a new tool we got in one of the last updates, and it is called the seam allowance tool. And what that normally would do is if we had a piece of a quilt block, we would have it as artwork like this, or maybe even stitches, but typically artwork, and it would usually be a rectangle or square or something, a triangle maybe, but not a piece that looks like this. But we would then use that seam allowance tool, which is right here. I would click that, and it would give me my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if I cut this on a digital cutter, then I would have my built-in seam allowance. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use this instead to create an outline along the top. And I'm going to change my seam allowance down to 0 because I want that outline to hug this perfectly. And I don't need the circles anymore. So I'm going to check remove selection, and I'm going to check the rounded corner. Although for this design, you'll find out that it really doesn't matter. But just to be safe, I'm going to select rounded, and I'm going to click OK. And that is going to delete my circles, but leave me with that outline. And again, now this is artwork at the moment. It's not stitches, but that's okay. We'll turn it into stitches in our last step. Now what I want to do is I want to get rid of the bottom part of this and just leave these as scallops. Or I could get rid of the top part and leave these as scallops, but I'm just going to do the top because it's a little easier. And if I want at the bottom, I could just rotate it or flip it over and also make it for a bottom piece. All right, so what I'm going to do is double click on this to zoom it in so you can see it. And to manipulate this so I can cut it, I'm going to use my shape tool right here. Before I do that though, I'm going to turn on my grid lines by clicking my show hide grid control here on the left. And I want to, when I cut it, cut this off even with here. So to make that easier, I'm going to slide this down so those points are on a grid line. Doesn't really matter what grid line, I'm just using it right now as a guideline. An alternative, if I undo that move, was I could click right here on my upper ruler bar, click and drag, and that would drag in a guideline, which would do the same thing. So let's go ahead and use that guideline. I can then turn off my grid if I want, so we'll do that. So now I've got my guideline showing me exactly where I need to cut these two pieces. So to cut them, I'm going to use a function called split line. To get there, I am going to go to my shape tool with my object selected, and here you can see all the nodes or points in this design. To split the line right here, what I'm going to do is point my pointer right to where I want to split and right click on my mouse and select split line. Split line, okay? And I'm going to do the same thing right here. So I'm going to right click and select split line. And when I do that over here in my sequence view, you can see I've got the scallops, the one part on the top, one part on the bottom. The one on the bottom we don't need. The one on the top will represent our scallops. So if I select the one on the bottom, press delete on my keyboard, I'll double click on this to bring it in big so you can see it, and now I've got a set of scallops. Now with everything we've been working on so far, this has all been artwork, which meaning it won't stitch. So in order to turn this into stitches so we can actually get it onto our quilt, you would select whatever finished thing you've come up with out of the repeat tool, and in this case where we've split it, and turn it into stitches. So those would be done with these icons down here. I could use a run stitch to turn it into a run stitch. I could turn it into a motif stitch. Now that default motif there that came up 209, that doesn't look so good. So let's find something that's more suitable for scallops, like let's say 234, and click apply. We'll see how that looks. Still not so great. Let's change our pattern size down to 3. Click apply. Now we're looking a little bit nicer. Okay, so that might work, but you can choose anything you like. And you also could use a steel stitch. So there's a steel stitch, sort of a satin look scallop. You could also use the new function, the steel run. So that gives you a run stitch. I don't know how well you can see that. Let me click off it here. There we go. So that gives you a run stitch in the middle of the steel for an interesting effect. And you could turn this into an applique, but I don't know, that doesn't make much sense. But that is the repeat tool, and a lot of fun you can have with it. I've only scratched the surface, so get yourself some free time and just play with it using whatever things you can find to repeat. So it could be a design that you bought somewhere, it could be one of the built-in designs, one of the built-in decors, one of the built-in embellishments, even text, so you can repeat names, any piece of artwork, any of the custom shapes, etc. You can run through the repeat tool, and by using the repeat tool, which, I need to have something selected. Here, let me select this. Using that repeat tool, you can, by using the number across, the number down, and the horizontal and vertical distances, in our creative case, using minus numbers here, and using these flips and offsets and other things, by combining all of these things in various ways, you can get really interesting patterns. So again, that is fun with the repeat tool. So I want to thank everybody for watching this month and invite you to come back next month when we'll explore some more fun and creative things that you can do with Total Quilter. So again, thanks for watching and see you next month.